Hi guys, this is Maria K and welcome to my YouTube channel. Here I react to different videos about Slavic culture, Eastern European culture, languages and American stereotypes, British stereotypes and everything about different cultures. And today I'm going to react to why nobody lives in Eastern Europe. It's not that cold. So why I chose this video? Because I'm myself from Siberia, from a small city called Tomsk, and I lived almost my whole life there, and that's why I'm so interested in this topic. So let's see what the author wants to say. And by the way, this is from Mappack. Mappack, yeah, difficult to say, for me at least. The channel called Mappack. Sorry. Okay, let's start.
Stretching from Europe to the Pacific, Russia is impossible to miss on a map. But here's what your atlas won't tell you. Russia is actually two countries, occupying two different and very distinct spaces. Head far enough east and it turns into a ghost country. Russia's borders are familiar to everyone, but there's one invisible boundary that goes unmarked. Take a look right here. These are the Ural Mountains. They stretch over 1,500 miles, 2,400 kilometers from the Arctic Ocean to the Caspian Sea, and they divide one Russia from another. 77% of Russian territory is east of this line, but it's the polar opposite when it comes to the people. Only 25% of Russia's people live in this vast, forbidding land, and that number is declining. It doesn't.
Okay, so I'm from this green part of Russia, after Ural Mountains, by the way. Yeah.
To be that way. In fact, it probably shouldn't be that way, but it is. And here's why. We know what you're thinking. It's all because of the weather, right? Well, you're not completely wrong. The climate makes life out here pretty difficult. The average daily high temperature for the year is 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees Celsius. But remember, that's only the average. Siberia is a place of extremes. Take this town. It's Oymyakon in Russia's far eastern Sakha Republic. It's the coldest permanently inhabited town in the world, with the thermometer reaching a record low of 90 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, negative 67.7 Celsius. The people here are so hardy that schools are only closed when the temperature plunges below negative 67 degrees Fahrenheit, 55 below Celsius. And you thought your snow days were rough.
Okay, so about temperature, and it's very different in winter and in summer. For example, in my hometown in Siberia, yes, it can get to, I don't know, minus 40, not 40, okay, but minus 35 Celsius, of course, degrees in Celsius, because in Russia we measure the temperature by Celsius, yeah, in winter it's minus 35, and in summer it can get about 30 plus 30, you know, Celsius, of course, and it's like such a huge difference. Yeah, it's two different worlds, I would say. So I've never been to Sakha, I've never been to Yakutia, and I've never been to Oymyakon. I would love to visit this city, but I can imagine what it is talking about.
Antarctica gets colder than Siberia's harshest days. Let's be honest, it's probably not on your bucket list of places to live. But here's a question. Would you rather get rich in a harsh environment or stay poor somewhere comfortable? Because Siberia is and always has been the key to Russia's future. Russia has always been a country of deep contradictions. That neat line through the Urals is just one of them. At the start of 2025, its economy was the world's 11th largest, with a nominal GDP of $2.2 trillion and a 2024 GDP per capita of $14,900, according to the World Bank. That total GDP is smaller than the likes of Italy and Brazil, while its GDP per capita is lower than Costa Rica's. But it shouldn't be like that. Russia is sitting on so much buried treasure, it would make old explorers and pirates think they died and gone to heaven. When it comes to natural resources, Russia is the undisputed champion of the world. It has an estimated $75 trillion worth of resources it can tap. That far exceeds any other country, even the United States, which comes in a distant second place with $45 trillion. And if you think that these resources are limited to the ones you know about from the news, think again. Obviously, there's hydrocarbons. Russia is an energy powerhouse. In 2020, it had the world's largest proven reserve of natural gas at 1.32 quadrillion cubic feet, 37.3 trillion cubic meters, and about 80 billion proven barrels of oil, ranking it 8th on the planet. And then there's the 78% of Russia's natural gas reserves that are located in Siberia. But that's only the tip of the iceberg.
So I knew, for sure, of course, I knew that in Siberia there is so much of resources, like so many of them, but I never remembered the numbers actually, because I was not very interested in it. But yeah, most of these resources are in Siberia.
Brought up old-time treasure hunters if there wasn't gold, and lots of it. Russia is one of the world's leading producers. In 2023, it had 322 tons of domestic supply, but consumed only 71 of them.
Wow.
That's valuable not just for jewelry, but for industrial uses. In fact, the device you're watching this video on probably has some gold in it. Don't take it apart though. That gold is useful to help conduct the electricity. This should clue you in on something. Russia doesn't need to rely on the resources and treasures of yesteryear. The United States Geological Survey estimates that Russia has 3.8 million tons of rare earth metals, making it the world's 5th largest trove. The Sakha Republic in eastern Siberia alone has at least 1.7 million tons of rare earth material at its Tomtor deposit. Russia says it actually has a reserve of 28.7 million total rare earth tons. Take that for what it's worth, which is probably not much, but even if the numbers are fudged, it's still a lot, and demand for these critical metals is surging. They're needed for modern digital technologies. For example, neodymium is used in magnets, electric motors, and to make smaller, more efficient memory storage drives for computers. Also, are you watching this video on an OLED screen? If you are, you probably appreciate the bright, vivid colors that make everything so easy to remember. Terbium was probably used for that.
Okay.
And there's more, but we'll get to that later. What we're trying to say is whatever you want in the world, Siberia probably has it. Whether it's arable land for farming, fish in the seas, timber, iron ore for steel, diamonds for that engagement ring you can't afford, or even beryllium for potential nuclear fusion reactors. You'll find it here. If it meant getting in on all this action, you could handle the cold, right? It sounds far-fetched from the comfort of your chair, but stick with us as we look across the 51 miles, 82 kilometers of the Bering Strait. Alaska was once Russian territory, but it was never a big part of the empire. There were about 10,500 people under the direct government of the Russian Fur Company at the time the Americans purchased it, at least according to the mastermind of the idea, Secretary of State William Seward. The deal was called Seward's Folly at the time. A look at the thermometer will clue you in on what the people back then were thinking. The Russians largely avoided Alaska for a reason, or so it seemed. Temperatures in the winter routinely drop to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 34 Celsius in Fairbanks, and they can get as low as negative 38 Fahrenheit, negative 39 Celsius in extreme conditions in Anchorage. But soon, there was a gold rush, and tens of thousands of settlers poured in, braving the cold and more, because what's a little frostbite when you're rich? By the 20th century, the United States understood the geographic and strategic value of Seward's Folly. It sent men and resources to defend the area in World War II and built the Alaska or Alcan Highway to ensure the territory was connected with the contiguous United States through Canada. The road was completed in 1942, and returning troops came back with stories of Alaska's wondrous natural beauty. More people moved in and more roads were built. Alaska has almost 17,700 miles, 28,500 kilometers of them, according to its Department of Transportation. Other infrastructure investments came hot on the road's heels, especially when oil was discovered in 1968. Enter the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. It was tough work. The cold climate and permafrost proved to be enormous challenges, but the engineers got it done, and the state has benefited enormously ever since. Oil revenues have allowed for stable governance of the state and even a universal basic income, the Alaska Permanent Fund. Annual payouts typically range between $1,000 and $2,000 per person every year. Also, Alaska's strategic location means that the U.S. military has 9 bases in the state, which brings jobs and ensures continued federal support for the state's infrastructure. Alaska is still a tough climate to live in, but with all of this to go around, more people are gritting their teeth and doing it. The state had a population of just over 733,000 in the 2020 U.S. Census. That was up by over 23,000 compared to the 2010 census. That's not the case in Siberia. Start by looking at the city of Norilsk in Krasnoyarsk Krai, right in the heart of Siberia. It's the second largest settlement north of the Arctic Circle, so the weather here can get pretty harsh. Even in July, the daily mean temperature is only 58 degrees Fahrenheit, 14.5 Celsius, but it is getting warmer, and in early 2015, a local craftsman noticed something odd. His floor was beginning to tilt downward. It didn't take an expert eye to confirm this, though his wife said the same thing. As it turned out, their building was actually sinking beneath their feet. Melting permafrost was slowly eroding its foundation, and the structure needed to be condemned. The problem isn't just with the warming climate, though. Badly designed engineering is also playing a part. Heat from the sewers and chemical pollution are also melting the permafrost. And that's not the only thing that can make life out here hard. Norilsk is the most polluted city in Russia. There was an almost biblical scene out here in 2016 when the Daldikan River turned bright red. But the Russian government couldn't just blame it on the wrath of God. That would have been an easy get out. The cause was a chemical spill from a nearby factory that was subsequently forced to shut down. And the river wasn't the only thing wrong with this city. It was just the most extreme example. The locals also often complain about black or red snow, or the blue fog that makes their throats itchy. They even claim to know the taste of different gases leaking from the pipes. One man said the gas from copper had a sweet flavor. Nickel, he said, tasted different, which is a neat party trick. But these are becoming increasingly common occurrences in Siberia, and it's not going to be fixed anytime soon. Let's blissfully.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of Norilsk. I've never been there, but yeah, actually, in north of Siberia, it's very common for like cities to be polluted so much, and so dramatically polluted. I don't know. It's like, as he said, the government is not going to fix it anytime soon, because our government unfortunately has something different to do.
Head back to Alaska for a moment. It has its share of environmental problems too, but both Juneau and Washington are actually trying to be responsible about them. No one would ever call the United States a model for how to treat indigenous people, but Washington is at least more active than Moscow in trying to make up for past mistakes. And there's the spending to prove it. A 2022 Government Accountability Office report found that the federal government spent $391 million between fiscal years 2016 and 2020 to repair damaged infrastructure in native Alaskan villages and protect them from future environmental threats. The support network between the capitals and the locals ensures that there's a quality of life that all residents in Alaska can come to expect, which is partly why the population of the state is growing. Meanwhile, in Russia, it's estimated that adapting the northern cities to the warmer temperatures would make the buildings in them 30 to 40% more expensive. And you'd also have to pour in millions more just to adapt or replace aging sewer systems and faulty pipelines. Modernizing Siberia's infrastructure won't be cheap. That's going to be a hard sell for a place with so few people living there. Russia isn't like the United States. Its government doesn't need to worry about negative media coverage. In Putin's Russia, the media is tightly controlled, and people are forced to consume news they don't trust. These sorts of problems are low on Moscow's list of priorities. But Let's head back to the Sakha Republic to find another example of what life in Siberia can really be like. Start with Oymyakon. It gets so cold that it lacks indoor plumbing for much of the year. The people who live here need to resort to outhouses. But there was one day that really showed how extreme life can be in this remote region. There was a dark wind blowing in the Sakha Republic on July 20th, 2018. 40% of this territory is north of the Arctic Circle, so the locals aren't used to seeing dark nights at this time of year. But on that day, the sun disappeared. It wasn't an eclipse, and the sky was clear. So why did the sun go missing? Wildfires. In Sakha, they're no longer a rare occurrence. They're expected. When the warm weather arrives, it often brings smoke instead of sunshine. On that day in 2018, thick layers of wildfire smoke from the south converged over remote villages, blotting out the sun completely. And with
wildfire is such a big problem for Siberia, for Russia in general, but for Siberia, it's like you can't even imagine. I remember one year, it was, I don't know, maybe 2010 or something, that the smoke from the wildfire was so thick in my region. It was everywhere, and you have to breathe it in. Yes, you had to breathe it in, and it was awful in the cities and everywhere. You couldn't escape it, because it's in the air. How could you escape it? Yeah, and so much of forest and die because of this, and so many of animals, wild animals, they suffer from wildfires, and it's such a huge problem, and the government doesn't do enough. They try, they're not even trying, really. It's just, it's awful to witness it.
billions of acres of forest, little infrastructure, and even fewer resources, managing those fires is nearly impossible. But the extreme conditions and less than great quality of life in the cities still don't solve most of the mystery. People have been willing to go to much further extremes with much less of a reward waiting for them. Alaska's Yukon gold rush should be more than enough proof of that. Vladimir Putin plans on taking advantage of this basic human drive. He wants to make Russia one of the world's top 5 producers of rare earth materials and make up 12% of the global market share by 2030. He won't be able to succeed, though. There's a reason why the Russian Far East only accounts for 5% of the country's GDP, despite all its resources. Russia has really bad geography when it comes to moving things around. Despite its almost 24,000 miles, 38,600 kilometers of coastline, it only ranks 36th in terms of the world's total container traffic, with 3.9 million 20-foot equivalent units according to World Bank data. That's because to ship things around the Russian coastline, commercial voyages need to move into the treacherous, icy waters of the Arctic Ocean and deal with ports that are likely to have ice too. Russia has the world's largest fleet of icebreakers, with 57 to try and compensate for this. 8 of these are nuclear powered, so they can stay at sea for lengthy periods, but they're expensive to build and operate. So, to move its goods around, there are 2 other options. The most natural thought is to move them by road or rail, and this is where the biggest problem comes in. Take out that map of Russia again and look at its roads. Then compare them with Alaska's. While Alaska's settlements are well connected, you'll see that Siberia has only one major road, and it runs along the region's southern stretch. This is the Trans-Siberian Highway.
Yeah, Trans-Siberian Highway. When it was built, they wanted to build it through my hometown, Tomsk, but the Tomsk citizens, they say they didn't want it. It was like more than 100 years ago, so they didn't want it. So that's why they didn't build it through Tomsk, and now it goes through Novosibirsk. And Novosibirsk, that's why Novosibirsk now is bigger than Tomsk, much bigger, and it's huge, and it's really long highway, I would say, but okay.
It's a giant. It's the third longest road in the world, spanning a distance of 6,800 miles, nearly 11,000 kilometers between St. Petersburg and Vladivostok. But look at where that highway starts, and you'll notice something else. European Russia, west of the Urals, is well connected by road, in stark contrast to the Asian part of Russia. It's much the same when it comes to the railway network. The European heartland is well connected, but only southern Siberia sees traffic along the Trans-Siberian Railway, which runs from Moscow to Vladivostok. This lack of connectivity is partially by design. It helps keep Siberia down, but you might have suspected this by now. Siberia was never a natural part of Russia. It was and still is an imperial project, one that was annexed sort of by accident. The Russians moved east to the Urals as part of a plan to acquire naturally defensible borders to prevent another invasion from the Mongols or the Tatars, who had once ruled them with an iron fist. But as adventurers moved further east, they discovered a treasure on the opposite side. Sure, the place was a giant icebox, even by their homeland standards, but that was a feature, not a bug. Siberia had plenty of life, after all. Critters that were well adapted to their harsh environment. There were Arctic foxes, sables, lynx, otters, and even tigers, and they all had really thick fur to keep them warm. These adventurers soon understood that the furs could be sold at an enormous profit in Europe. They were perfect for making warm textiles, and since the world was in the midst of a cooler period, called the Little Ice Age, the timing was perfect. Russia began to annex Siberia. The furs sold like crazy, and Russia's Tsars got the cash they needed to expand their military ambitions. It sounds familiar, and then, much like now, the locals didn't see much or any of the money. The arrangement was exploitative from the start. The Russians set up trading posts throughout Siberia. Meanwhile, the locals would be forced to provide regular fur tributes, but they didn't have much connection with European Russia, where all the action was. The territory was all part of the mother country, but Siberia looked more like an overseas colony than an extension of Russia proper. It was sort of a model for the European empires that would follow. While those colonial empires are gone now, Russia's imperial arrangement with Siberia remains. The rail and road network is good for Moscow to maintain its control of its Siberian territory, but it's not so great at serving the actual people who live out here. To find out why, let's take a road trip. The Trans-Siberian Highway is paved with asphalt or concrete along its entire length, and that's a good thing. Considering the sheer length of the road, it's an impressive engineering achievement, but not all asphalt and concrete are created equal. The quality of the road isn't the same everywhere. Once you go east of the Urals, the road's condition starts to deteriorate sharply, but it's not for the reason you think. Obviously, driving on an icy road for such long distances will always be dangerous, but in Siberia, the rain is the real enemy. Siberia has a rainy season. Well, sort of. The rain peaks in August, with 0.08 inches, 0.2 centimeters of water falling on average a day. That might not sound like a lot, but it translates to about 3.5 pints, 2 liters of water on 10.7 square feet, 1 square meter per day. Overall, you can expect significant rain between June and October. This isn't anything like the monsoon seasons in places far to the south, but there's more precipitation to go around in the summer. Here's the thing though. Alaska actually has a wetter climate. It's just that Alaska can take better care of its roads. The buildup of water along the remote Trans-Siberian Highway means that you're sure to encounter obstacles and quagmires along your journey. It doesn't help that road services are very lacking. A road journey here wouldn't be anything like one in Alaska, which still benefits from America's interstate highway system despite its distance. Gas stations or accommodations will be hard to find here. Travel guides advise would-be drivers to potentially prepare to camp out or even to stay in people's houses. Maybe camping doesn't sound so bad, in the summer at least. Siberia offers something rare these days. Its vast wilderness can mean some stunning night skies, but there's something else waiting for you. Plagues of mosquitoes. Have lots of bug spray and netting around if you plan on spending your time outdoors.
Here's the thing. When I was a teenager, my parents and I went on a road trip from my hometown Tomsk to Odessa. It's a city in Ukraine. So it took us about 4 or 5 days, and at night we spent nights camping outside. Yeah, camping, and because there were no hotels or motels on the road. And the distance between different cities, it's so huge in Siberia that it's really impossible, almost impossible to find a hotel or motel on the road. Only in the city you can find it, or in a village, maybe. Probably not, but maybe. And so about mosquitoes and all of them, it's such a big problem. I'm not sure how we call it, but in Russia we call it mashka. It's like a really small bugs that can bite you. Like literally, they have like teeth, and when they bite you, they take a really tiny piece of your skin to drink your blood, I would say. Yeah, I'm not sure how it works actually, but there's so many of them. They're like clouds of this kind of bugs flying around, especially if it's like rural areas, like villages or parts where they have like a lot of trees and different plants. There's so many of them. Really, it's impossible to escape. It's impossible to not to be bitten. And mosquitoes, they're so harsh. There are so many of them also. It's like, I don't know. It's such a big problem, really, even for cities. Of course, in the cities, because of less trees there, and it's, I don't know, maybe because of the different conditions of the cities, there are not so many of them, these bugs and mosquitoes, but still, especially in the evening, when the sun goes down, in summer, you go outside, and then you have to be prepared and use the repellent against these mosquitoes and the bugs, because otherwise you will get bitten. For sure.
Spray and netting around if you plan on spending your time outdoors. These are the sorts of things travelers in Siberia have to deal with all the time.
Yeah.
To get a sense of how isolated Siberian towns can be from each other, even along the Trans-Siberian Highway, consider this. Imagine you're in Irkutsk, in the oblast of the same name. Lake Baikal is nearby, so perhaps you've enjoyed it for a while, but now you need to get to Vladivostok. According to Google Maps, you have a driving distance of almost 2,400 miles, over 3,800 kilometers. To put that into perspective, it's longer than the distance between Chicago and Los Angeles, and it takes an estimated 52 hours and 56 minutes of driving to get from one place to the other. Better have a good playlist set up. What about the trains? Google data suggests a train ride of 71 hours and 52 minutes to travel the same distance. Nearly 3 solid days of pure travel.
Yeah, for example, for me to travel from my hometown in Siberia to Moscow, it's through the Ural Mountains. Yes, it's through. So my hometown is like this. It's in Siberia, but in a western part of Siberia. So it's more in west than Sakha or Krasnoyarsky Krai. And to travel from here, from my hometown to Moscow, for example, it takes about 3.5 days. Yeah, almost 4 days by train. By train.
Drive between Chicago and Los Angeles will probably be much shorter in the amount of time you need to spend on the road. And it's not just because of the shorter distance. The estimate is 28 hours 55 minutes by car on average and 43 hours 32 minutes by train, according to our Google Maps estimate. Siberia is just a much harsher and more treacherous environment to pass through, with fewer things to support travel. Overall, a journey along the entirety of the Trans-Siberian Highway can take a month or more. The trip along the rail line winds up being a little shorter because of the shorter distance and nature of the beast. Non-stop, you can expect to stay on the rails for a week, but with stops, the length of your excursion grows. It can last several weeks. This is all okay if the Russian government needs to move troops or equipment somewhere. It's not so great for the locals or for the development of their economy. Once again, this reality isn't just a bug. It's a feature of the imperial nature of the Siberian project. To see what we mean, voyage thousands of miles west to Ukraine. You would have been able to go from Vladivostok to Kiev along the railway a few years ago, but the special military operation changed that. Now, instead of tapping Siberia's natural resources, Moscow is tapping its men. The special military operation didn't go according to Putin's plans. A few months after it began, he found his forces on the run, so he got desperate. He just announced that the 4 Ukrainian provinces his troops partially occupied were now part of Russia. There was no way he could just give up so soon. He needed manpower and got it in the place you'd probably expect. By the end of 2023, the first full year of mobilization, it was clear that not all Russians were suffering the same. 6 of the 10 Russian regions with the highest mortality rates were east of the Ural Mountains. Here's a fact that might stun you even more. Take out your map again and look at the Republic of Buryatia in Russia's far east. Men from this remote place along the Trans-Siberian Highway were 75 times more likely to be killed in action than their counterparts in Moscow, despite its population being 13 times bigger. But if you're a dictator, it's easier to cover up mass funerals when truth seekers would need to venture for thousands of miles along the treacherous Trans-Siberian Highway to find out what's really going on. You don't even need to do anything dirty to the journalists brave enough to try to find the answers. The open road is your best friend. From that perspective, why bother to improve it at all? Improving the road network would go far in developing the economy, but it might also undermine Moscow's central control of Siberia. At least on some level, Moscow wants the Siberian minorities to be isolated from each other. That was how Russia was able to extend its control so far to the east in the first place. But this raises a curious problem. With all of this in mind, why did Siberia's population grow to begin with, especially in the 20th century? And why weren't the necessary infrastructure improvements made?
Oh, that's the topic for another day, I would say, but it's such a difficult and harsh topic. Why? I know why. I don't know if you know, but it's such a pain to know it and to understand it. So this is it for today. I think we continue later in part 2. So subscribe and I'll see you next time. Bye.